Professor Smith, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us. The sustainability of GATE is the issue here. As a research professor and chief economist at Georgetown University, you have developed a framework for restructuring long-term occupational and educational projections, a report that projects education demands for occupations in the United States economy through the year 2020. Your long-term position here puts you in a wonderful perfectly poised to answer a couple of questions, not what just the recommendation says, but more specifically, how sustainable is a program like GATE when you consider there are other countries, the United States being one where you are right now, where they have a greater per capita GDP, but still students have to pay their way as they go. So my first question to you, and thanking you for being here, is the GATE, which you are familiar with, our GATE program here in Trinidad and Tobago, in its present form, how sustainable is it?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
I'm happy to participate in this conversation. I think the way this question is phrased, it's almost certain that we know that GATE is not sustainable, at least in the long term. We have a lot of statistics on how much money has been spent so far, but no statistics on the consequences. How much return have we had? When we look at the debate that's going on in this country right now about GATE, it seems to me that the entire question is about, well, we should continue with GATE. We should, always spend as much money as we have or we can on tertiary education without any understanding that free today has consequences for tomorrow. There's always an opportunity cost. We tend to look at these types of government spending as free money when, in fact, it's an investment, in this case, in our future. And the easiest and most obvious way to assess any balance between private and public benefits of higher education is in terms of a return on investment. So if we're investing today, this contemporaneous spending today really represents an intergenerational tax on our future. We expect returns, and we have no way of sustaining all of these costs so far without finding out a better way of quantifying these returns or ensuring that we do get some sort of sustainable return.
That is the question, because though it is stated that over 190,000 persons have benefited from this over a 12-year period, it has cost the country $5.5 billion. And this expectation, this entitlement, the feeling that we are entitled to this and this is the way governments are supposed to operate, is what I am hoping that your clarity will make clear to our listeners is not a sustainable way, because, as you said, the return on investment does not make sense.
Well, that's, this is something that many governments have struggled with. I think in our debate on GATE, seem to think that this discussion is unique to Trinidad. Many governments weigh the cost and benefits of spending money. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Everybody's heard that. And once money is spent somewhere, it means that, it's less money in another part of government spending for investment. But here's a question. When we ask ourselves which countries are spending on free tuition, which countries are offering free tertiary education to their citizens, we have some easy examples. We have Denmark, we have Germany, we have Sweden, we have, up to a few years ago, Brazil. But what we fail to realize is that this isn't free education. This is education that's paid for by the citizens. When you look at the taxation structure of European countries, or the very same countries we talk about offering free education, the income tax can be close to 40% in some cases, and even over 40%. In Germany, the income tax is 41%, and the equivalent of their VAT is 19%. In Finland, their VAT is 24%. Denmark, Sweden is about 25%. So these citizens of these European countries have made a conscious effort, a conscious decision to say that we value education so much that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. We're willing to pay for it. The conversation in Trinidad is very different. In Trinidad, we expect the government to pay for it out of government resources without fully understanding that government resources are the resources of the people. When we spend money today, we are actually taking bread out of the mouths of our children for tomorrow. So everyone who's there saying, well, I want my child to have access to GATE. I want to have access to GATE today without any consequences, without any understanding or any care for what it means for the future. I just want it today. In my mind, seems a little bit selfish because we are not really assessing what it means to have access to this. This is not a privilege that's afforded. It's a privilege that's afforded to us. It is not a requirement. So once we have that privilege, we have to understand we accept that privilege, and there are consequences for it, and we should, in fact, do the right types of things to ensure that this program can continue in the future.
It is 20 minutes after 10 o'clock. My guest is Trinidadian Dr. Nicole Smith, who graduated with honors in economics and mathematics from the University of the West Indies, also the recipient of the Arthur Lewis Memorial Prize for Outstanding Research at the master's level, receiving her PhD in economics from American University in Washington, D.C. She is very en courant with the GATE program here in Trinidad. That is what she does out there, looking at the whole question of long-term investment in education and the movement of the workforce. So context on comparison, Doctor, is what I always feel will inform and temper folks' understanding while adjusting the entitlement expectations. Now, I'm not going to ask you to give me the detail that every American student is going to pay for higher education. I will, in fact, ask you if you can make to our listeners, give them some idea as to the kind of money students pay for the higher education that we get in Trinidad and Tobago, free or minimally costing through the GATE program.
Well, you know, we all know that necessity is the mother of all invention. And for some time, maybe if you look at the United States, way the United States offered education to its citizens in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, the cost that we would pay as an individual was about even 5%, 10%, with the majority of the burden falling on the state, whether it's federal or state government. Most recently, because of the recession that hit the United States in 2007, they call it the Great Recession. It was the worst recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. This particular recession saw so many people losing jobs. The government itself, you know, they lost resources, depleted resources, banks closed, people lost their homes, and because of that, money was tight, money was scarce. So we had to have a restructuring in the United States of the way in which governments spent money on education. And right now, that ratio, which was about 60 to 33 to 7, that's federal to state to family. The federal paid 60% of cost of education. State paid 33%, and an individual paid 7%. Today, here's how that breakdown is. It's 34% federal, 16% state, and now 50% individual.
50%.
So every American bears 50%, even in undergrad, of the burden of the cost of his college. And the average student who goes to college, and we have a different definition of college, it's 2-year associate's degrees as well as the 4-year. The average student can pay around $15,000 a year, U.S. dollars. But in general, if you want to go to a prestigious organization, a university which offers master's degrees and PhDs, such as the University of the West Indies, these types of schools can cost upwards of $20,000, $30,000 U.S. dollars a year for 4 years to go to school.
Professor and Chief Economist at Georgetown University on Education and the Workforce is our guest, Professor Nicole Smith. You know, folks, when they hear these numbers that used to be 77% for the individual and now 50%, folks can get a better idea that when they look at the recommendations coming out of the task force, and that includes a couple of things. One is that a student cannot continue receiving GATE subsidy if the grade average is bad. Students over 50 will no longer qualify for assistance. Tertiary education institutions, rather, that are not credited will no longer be receiving funding, and a reduction of the reintroduction of a means test to assist in screening people properly. Folks think that this is a big deal, but when you look at the kind of figures you called a moment ago, this is only a drop in the bucket en route to correcting what is an unsustainable investment.
I think you're quite correct in making that statement. And I especially like the fact that you brought up the means test, because I think we need to have a discussion about the meaning of equality versus the meaning of equity. The way the GATE is offered to students in Trinidad and Tobago right now, it is offered on an equal basis. anyone can have access to it, and anyone, irrespective of what your income is, what your family income is, how much money you have access to GATE. In my opinion, I think that is really a wrong-minded approach to GATE. GATE really should be offered to those who can't afford it. And when we have conversations here, and the most people or the most concerns from the middle class from Trinidad has been, who's going to feel the burden? The middle class is going to feel the burden. The poor, they have their social safety nets. There's so much offered to this country for the poor. It's the middle class is going to feel the burden. Well, we need to better be able to define who's the middle class in Trinidad. We need to be able to know who really needs this money and not necessarily make this money available to people that don't need it. So equity is what matters. The poor student who's from a poor family, maybe in what we call in the U.S. the first-generation college goer, the person who has, a large family and a low income. There are many ways we can determine that. Okay, so in one case, Trinidad and Tobago, I think, is often concerned, well, how do you determine who has money? You have people in the underground economy, people working in the shadow economy, the parallel economy. So much of our disposable income comes from that. This, again, is not a problem that's unique to Trinidad. There are many countries with very similar economies who, have found ways of trying to determine exactly who is worthy or who should have access to it. And I'll give an example. So I'm at Georgetown University. And in Georgetown University, at any one point in time, I could have a classroom of 100 people. The average, the sticker cost, so if you go to the Georgetown University website, the sticker cost of going to university in Georgetown is about $50,000 US per year, anywhere between $50,000 and $60,000 US per year. But in my classroom, I could have one student paying $50,000. I could have the student right next to you paying $10,000. I could have the student next to him paying $3,000, and I could have the student next to him paying $0 and a full scholarship. It all depends on what your income is,
That's why the
what your
means
family
testing
income is, and how much you can afford. And we need to really consider that.
Lot of folks put their arms up when they heard of means testing, but that is the only way you're going to get yourself on the proper road to any meaningful impact on this kind of money we're talking about. Allocated this year $650 million towards the GATE program. Some speculate, however, whenever you hear that the sky is falling, usually it must be accompanied by some scenario. A scenario that's been put in the public arena is that from the recommendations that you will have a high dropout rate and thus interfere with the aspirations of the nation to provide high-level educated folks for the workplace later on. I think this is a sky is falling scenario. Do you concur with that, or are you at variance?
Well, I think there will always be some sort of response in the beginning. And so with any type of stimulus, with any type of new policy, there will always be a response. And it's very easy to see that the response might be negative initially, that people will initially, drop out or decide that they're not going to go to the program. But I'm putting it to you, or I dare say now to this discussion, that what matters here is education for what? Because we have numbers that boast that we've taken the percentage of people in Trinidad and Tobago who participate in tertiary education from the teens to the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. Yet we have so many people with this tertiary education who are unable to find jobs,
That's right.
who are unable to create jobs. So what is the point of creating all of these so-called degrees and tertiary degrees from many institutions that aren't even accredited or their programs aren't accredited? We have all of these degrees, and we talk about the numbers, and you can't create something. Education for what? Education is a means of empowerment. Education is a means of securing our future. And if you're going to have this education and you have so many people who aren't using it to its fullest advantage, then we really need to sit down and ask the question, education for what? Perhaps we should spend some time discussing the types of degrees we're doing, the quality of degrees, understanding the way these degrees, in fact, connect to the economic objectives of the country, the way these degrees connect to the diversification objectives for the countries and not necessarily offer a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year ability for students to, spend time on a campus and find themselves.
If you're going to invest this kind of money over 12 years, so far $5.5 billion in higher education, then surely the recipients of this money and the graduates as a result of this must indeed be working for the betterment, the advancement of the country. To say the demand of the country must be closely synchronized with what the university is putting out.
I agree with you 100%. We tend to have an aversion to statistics. And I found that in speaking to people at home about, well, how many people have come back? Well, for every dollar spent on education, what has been the impact on the economy? For every dollar spent in education, how many people have jobs? What types of jobs do people have? What are the incomes? We have an aversion to collecting statistics. And I think that part of the reason for that is we don't want it to show any negative results because we just want to be able to go to this unlimited bank and put the card in and get the money. But part of the reason you collect statistics as well, to demonstrate the negative, is really to demonstrate the positive, to show how much impact GATE has had. And we need to start collecting statistics. There are some institutions that are graduating students who are not able to create jobs of their own and are not able to also get jobs. So that tells me that there's a learning concern. I'd be concerned about what types of skills you're actually getting. Are these skills marketable? Are these skills in demand? What is happening to these skills that you can't create your own job or get a job? And we need to stop just blaming the government for this.
At the end of the day, where we are now, in thanking you, Professor Nicole Smith, for taking the time to be with us this morning, I will invite you at another time for us to have an even extended conversations once the recommendations are, in fact, sanctioned, when they are out legally, because we've been discussing a leak thus far here. But once the ministry has adopted a position as to how this GATE correction will be approached, I would like to invite you to be back with us here on Brunch.
Thank you so very much.
I thank you so much. You have a wonderful day, ma'am.
You too.
Thank you so much, Professor Nicole Smith, joining us inside Brunch. It's 32 minutes after 10 o'clock. We've got a full slate on this morning. We will be moving very shortly to talk about customer service here in Trinidad and Tobago. At the back of that, we will be looking at the African Film Festival, and then Mr. Martin Daly will join me on the sunsetting of the Miscellaneous Act, which includes the Bail Act, as it also does the anti-gang law. That and more coming up as we continue inside Brunch.